You're watching The Legal Breakdown, Glenn. We have breaking news right now. Yet again, Donald Trump has had one of his political opponents indicted. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian. A third Donald Trump enemy has been criminally indicted. This time, John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor from his first term, who he fired and has been railing against really ever since. So, we can now add John Bolton to the collection of Donald Trump enemies that the Department of Justice has criminally indicted. New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. I will say, Brian, I just printed out, probably killing some trees in the process, a 26-page indictment. I read through it very quickly, and it looks like this criminal indictment may be in a slightly separate category than the James indictment and the Comey indictment. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is a winning case against John Bolton, and I'm not suggesting that it's not the product of Donald Trump's vindictiveness, because, Donald Trump has been on a revenge tour ever since he returned to the Oval Office. But I will say, I view this one a little bit differently. And let me just tell our viewers that it consists of basically two separate criminal charges, but a total of 18 counts. 18 crimes are alleged in this indictment. 8 crimes of transmission of national defense information and 10 counts of unlawful retention of national defense information. And let's just tally up the potential prison time in conjunction with these 18 criminal charges. They're 10 years a pop. So the maximum period of imprisonment would be 180 years. Now, of course, we have voluntary sentencing guidelines that will come in much, much, much lower than that. But, the charge of mishandling national defense information actually falls in the United States Code under the Espionage Act. So these 18 crimes that are being alleged here are in violation of our nation's espionage laws. Now, of course, the proof is always in the evidentiary pudding to see whether prosecutors will be able to prove up beyond a reasonable doubt and unanimously to all 12 jurors, when and if this case goes to trial, that they've got the goods to back up what they put in this indictment. But if I can kind of unravel the indictment a little bit, translate it from legalese to English for our viewers, what it appears to be when you read through this 26-page indictment is that John Bolton was providing a whole bunch of information to two people. Those two people are designated Individual 1 and Individual 2. And as the indictment sets out, it doesn't name them, but it says the identities of Individual 1 and Individual 2 are known to the grand jury. I suspect these two people testified before the grand jury, but they didn't necessarily have to. An FBI agent could have provided information about those two individuals who it looks like will be witnesses, most likely, against Bolton at trial. And the flavor of this indictment is that Bolton was providing them lots of information about his day-to-day activities as national security advisor. Repeatedly throughout the indictment, they refer to these as kind of diary entries, a day in the life of a national security advisor. The allegation is that he sent these two individuals, Individual 1 and Individual 2, more than 1,000 pages of information, largely describing what he was doing, where he was traveling, what he was tasked with as national security advisor. All of it, Brian, smacks of information he's providing to these people in anticipation of writing the book that he ultimately did write and have published. There was some litigation about whether he should be permitted to publish the book or not, but ultimately it was published. So this kind of has the flavor of not John Bolton like giving information to the enemy about classified materials, top secret documents, but him kind of, putting together what he would need to write a book. I'm not downplaying it and I'm not excusing it, because what the prosecutors allege is that lots of these 1,000 pages contain national defense information, top secret or secret, classified information, and he shouldn't have been sending it over his public email accounts. AOL or Google are the two that are listed in the indictment. He had no authority to share it, to disseminate it with others. But, that is kind of what this indictment boils down to. It looks like, if true, if they can prove it up beyond a reasonable doubt, he may have violated our nation's laws in his zeal to write and profit off of a book.
Is there no irony, Glenn, in the fact that he's being indicted by a president who himself was indicted for illegal retention of classified documents, a crime that he then spent the subsequent months, years, basically excusing?
Irony is one word for it. We have seen those infamous photos of boxes and boxes of classified materials that Donald Trump was hiding in his bathrooms and his ballroom at Mar-a-Lago. And he was indicted for being in a conspiracy, that involved multiple people at his direction moving these boxes around and hiding them from law enforcement authorities and violating a grand jury's subpoena for the return of that, government information. So, yeah, irony is one word for it. But, of course, Donald Trump has sworn to take revenge on his enemies. And, regardless of whether or not Bolton did any damage to our national security, it looks like Donald Trump has now made good on his promise to, in a revenge-fueled prosecution, get after guys like John Bolton.
Speaking of, Trump was asked about this news. Here's what he had to say.
Bolton was just indicted by a grand jury in Maryland. Do you have a reaction to that?
I didn't know that. You tell me for the first time, but I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but it's the way it goes.
So this is Trump saying, you're telling me for the first time. So clearly he has no idea, completely in the dark, separation of church and state between the president and the attorney general, of course. And he says, he thinks he's a bad person. It's too bad, but that's just the way it goes. So what's your reaction to the fact that this is the way Trump answered?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think anybody believes a word that tumbles out of Donald Trump's mouth. With respect to whether he knew his Department of Justice, which he, controls with an iron grip. He is de facto the lead prosecutor in all of these vindictive or potentially vindictive prosecutions. So I don't believe that. But also when he continues to rail against somebody who now has a right to a fair trial, and there are actually restrictions on what government officials can say about somebody who is pending trial. They're not supposed to say anything that would make it difficult for the defendant to, enjoy a fair and impartial jury. This is just more evidence of vindictiveness when the President of the United States continues to badmouth as a bad guy the, enemy that was just indicted by Donald Trump's Department of Justice.
So what are the next steps here, Glenn, in terms of this Bolton prosecution playing itself out?
So the next thing that will happen is there will be an arraignment. That is the first court hearing after somebody has been indicted. It's usually a 5 to 10 minute court hearing. I attended James Comey's arraignment last week, and it lasted about 25 or 30 minutes. There was a little bit more to discuss, including on the vindictive prosecution front. But he'll be notified of the charges against him, what he's been indicted on. He will enter a plea, undoubtedly, of not guilty. And then the judge will go about setting the next court hearing, maybe setting a motions schedule, picking a trial date. It's sort of the housekeeping of, a criminal case being initiated. And then we're going to see motions filed. And I have to believe we're going to see a vindictive prosecution motion filed on behalf of John Bolton. I don't know if it will be a winning motion or not, but what we do know, Brian, is prosecutors had looked at this case previously and for years had declined to bring a case. So for openers, that will give John Bolton's defense team at least a straight-faced claim that once Donald Trump took over again, lo and behold, a different decision was made and John Bolton was prosecuted. But, the flip side of the vindictive prosecution coin is that it's not unprecedented for high government officials to write books and wrongfully, inappropriately, and maybe even unlawfully end up disclosing information in those books that they shouldn't disclose, because a prime example of that is General David Petraeus, former military general, former director of the CIA. He wrote a book. The title was All In, and what did he do? He ended up wrongfully disclosing classified information in the book. He was criminally investigated. He pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts and I believe was put on 6 months probation. So, this is something that if you're a high government official and you have a security clearance that allows you to access some of our nation's, most closely guarded secrets, and you write a dang book talking about the work you did, well, you're kind of assuming the risk that you might end up like John Bolton or like a General Petraeus.
In those instances, can John Bolton just point to the precedent that was established by David Petraeus as a way to kind of, if the vindictive prosecution defense doesn't work, to give himself some cover using that defense?
It won't give him cover, but any time a defendant can point to a comparable case that was prosecuted against a similarly situated defendant, Bolton could say, look, the government that was in power at the time let General Petraeus plead guilty to 2 misdemeanors, and he didn't do a day of jail time. He was allowed to do 6 months of probation. So he was held accountable. He now has a criminal conviction for what he did. So Bolton could say, listen, I am similarly situated. This had nothing to do with me disclosing information to America's enemies. So I should receive that kind of really lenient treatment as well. But I don't know if the evidence in this case is anything comparable to the evidence, the wrongful disclosures and dissemination of classified information by General Petraeus. But let me just touch on one other thing, Brian. There's an interesting tidbit right in the middle of this 26-page indictment. They reveal that nefarious actors from Iran, according to the indictment, hacked into Bolton's AOL account and got a bunch of this information that he had been sending to Individual 1 and Individual 2. And then it looks like there was some blackmail going on. And, what this conjures up for me and what I want to put our viewers just on notice of is that if nefarious actors hacked into a U.S. citizen's emails, stole a bunch of information, and then took those sort of ill-gotten gains and gave it back to the federal government, the CIA, the FBI, to be used against the American citizen, that may actually run afoul of the Fourth Amendment. Not that foreign actors are bound by or will feel like they have to comply with the Fourth Amendment, but once evidence that was illegally obtained is then provided to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government chooses to use it against an American citizen, let me just say that conjures up a potential attack on the usability, the admissibility of that evidence. I want to plant that seed because you might see some litigation regarding that issue moving forward once they kind of dropped right in the middle of this indictment that Iran had hacked into Bolton's email account and stolen information that somehow made its way as part of the information in this case.
Well, we will continue to cover this case along with the other ongoing prosecutions from Trump's enemies and any subsequent prosecutions that we see from those people who Trump considers his enemies. For those who are watching, if you'd like to follow along, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. I'm going to put the links right here on the screen. It's a great way to support us, and it is 100% free. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.